So we left off talking about the virtual world as fragmenting of our relationships, and we then talked about a concrete embodied space, the mall, as potentially doing the same sort of thing. And so now I want to talk a little bit about this odd space of some of our own relationships, and focus particularly on secluded seniors. Sorry, that text is a little small now that I'm seeing it. Just maybe a little too much data on this slide. 18% of seniors live alone, while 43% report feeling lonely on a regular basis. People 60 years old and older who reported feeling lonely saw a 45% increase in their risk for death. Isolated seniors also had a 59% greater risk of mental and physical decline than their more social counterparts. Loneliness is contagious. Older adults who feel lonely are more prone to behave in ways that may cause other people to not want to be around them. So it's a bit of a vicious circle. They have a tendency to further isolation, pushing people away and not engaging with others. 2/3 of the older adults who were lonely were either married or living with a partner of some kind. And this finding lends credence to the belief that it's not about how many relationships we have, but it's about how meaningful and invested we are. So just some stats about, this isn't just an experience of phone users or mall shoppers, but loneliness is being fostered in a variety of ways across our culture and across demographic groups. So these three that we talked about, all of them are examples that show opportunities for greater connection, closer embodied relationships. But ironically, for whatever reason in our time, they've exacerbated loneliness. So how do we understand how to foster true community? So I want to get at that a little bit later. But for now, a new section. I told you I wanted to do a little bit of diagnosing this issue as a communal problem and then diagnosing it as a spiritual problem. So I hope to take this 90 or so minutes and diagnose, to the best of my ability, the communal problem, and then for my afternoon session, the spiritual. Hopefully that will leave some time for still Q&A amongst all of this. I'm cool with you to still interrupt me. And then furthermore, talk at the very end about some ideas that are latent within the church, our own life and practice, that may be worth focusing on and recovering, and some theological emphases that come from Luther, Bonhoeffer, St. Paul, on things that maybe we also need to recover in terms of narrating the whys of our practices. So the communal problem. I want to start with an unsettling question. I like questions because they put me off balance and make me think about things that I don't normally think about, stuff that I take for granted. And so I also like to use them to lead discussions. So this comes from Leah Labrasco. She's a former atheist turned Roman Catholic. She occasionally writes for First Things. This comes out of Commonwealth magazine, a Catholic publication. She says, I once had a job in which I taught adults how to notice and break counterproductive or destructive habits of thought or behavior. One question I liked asking people who felt stuck was, if someone could see you, what would they guess you were trying to do? If someone could see you, what would they guess you were trying to do? I still ask myself this question, and it jars me loose from some embarrassing things. I say I'm working on a piece of writing, but it appears that I'm checking to make sure nothing new has been posted online in the past 3 minutes. Right? Think sermons. Right? I say I'm trying to solve a baking problem, but it appears that I'm coming up with a list of reasons it was impossible to solve anyway. So this is jarring because it talks to me about me, right? That I get distracted. I take a Facebook break. I would like to argue that all the time I'm, prepping for classes or grading papers and et cetera, et cetera. But no, I'm wasting time in a way. And it's kind of this Martian anthropologist question, right? If an alien anthropologist came to Earth and watched our habits and behaviors without ever engaging us in a qualitative way and asking us to explain ourselves, what would they observe? How would they count for our actions and behaviors? This is what cultural anthropologists do when they go out and observe foreign cultures. They are that alien. And sometimes they engage, but it's never native for them. So this is the alien anthropologist question. If someone could see you, what would they guess you were trying to do? I wonder this when I see my students on their phone in my lecture. So to back out of this, I've got a clip I just want you to watch. And I apologize for this buzz, but it is because my computer's done. So, this is the first one. Okay, I think we'll get you there.
Driving with a box stuck under his car. Like, who knows how long he was driving? I saw him pull out of the parking lot and turn right, and the box is still stuck under his car. So who knows how long he was driving with that box under his car? I bet he got home, he pulled into his driveway.
Now in the sky, I'm not. Wow. Did I do this? It's not. It's not
I don't think it's
real.
real. I don't think it's real.
See the one? We see the Empire State Building is like really close to it.
So that's called I Forgot My Phone. And as you can see there, it has 51 million views. I don't know what the answer is. I kind of think that we're had by these devices now. It's similar to catching a cold, or having a headache, or having a belief. Luther talked about this as the bondage of the will. We are captive. What we saw in that video, obviously, was a very true-to-life situation. If it's 2 minutes and has no narration and tells a story only by imagery, but still has 51 million views, it's connecting with some people across our world. It's telling the truth about something. So we have to ask the question, if we're had by our phones, what are we actually up to on our devices? So here are some things. This is again from the Pew Research Organization. A majority of us, so it's broken down in age groups, 18 to 29, 30 to 49, 50 plus. Almost all of us are text messaging. Almost all of us are using the internet, FaceTime, Skype, email, and it gets lower as you get down here. Watching music or watching videos and doing music is somewhat less. Higher for the younger generations, lower for the older ones. That's what we're up to, right? But if we go back to that Leo Labrasco question, right? If someone could see you, what would they say that you were trying to do? Well, how, if she were to come along and actually ask you what you were trying to do, what would we report? Here's what's been reported. So a lot of us, right, 18 to 49-year-olds throughout this room, and some people who are older than 50, are avoiding being bored. Others, at a lesser rate, are pulling a Jean-Paul Sartre, who said, hell is other people. And so we're avoiding others around us. Sure, not to be good. And then, there's practical use to this, right? GPS. But the troubling thing is, do any of us know how to use a real map anymore? Right? We offload a lot of responsibilities to these devices. I mean, how many phone numbers do you have memorized? Truly. I don't have to remember them, so I just don't. Right? It's freed up brain space, right? I'm opening some space on the internal hard drive, as it were. So those are just a couple things that we're doing. We'll come back to this. But let's talk about how much this stuff occupies our time in a week. So there's 168 hours in a week. Data says that we spend time using our devices 50 hours a week. Now, I think we need to break this down in a couple different ways, right? I'm using a device right now, it's a computer, I'm doing work, right? Many of you use computers to do your work. So this isn't just about pulling out our phones and distractedly entertaining ourselves until our eyes are bleeding. There is legitimate use for some of this stuff. So I don't want you to hear me saying in any of this, while I try to raise the questions about what this kind of use is doing to us communally, I don't want you to hear me saying that I'm somehow sort of a Luddite, where I want to get rid of technology. Obviously you can see that I'm using it. I have my phone here, my iPad is in my bag. I've built my own computers. I'm a video game geek. So I like my own entertainments and distractions, right? I told you yesterday that I have Netflix and Amazon Prime, like so many others, although I do watch very little TV. Just entertained by more things, books and games, I guess. But at any rate, not all of this is necessarily bad. Not all of this is necessarily detrimental to our community. But it's worth tracking how device usage has come to take up the time in our week. So work week is about 40 hours. Now, I know I'm talking to pastors, and that might just be a lie, right? It ought to be true, but obviously, with ministry, things come up. Some of us make our own bad choices and say yes to too many things, so we've got boundary issues. And our congregations have laziness issues as well. So there, 60 hours, 80 hours, I don't know. I've heard some pastors do 100 hours. When do you sleep, right? When you relate to your family. That's troublesome to me, but 40 to 60 hours is probably a pastoral work week. I hope more of you are closer to the 40-hour side. But even as an academic, I'm not quite there. I'm more than 40 hours. Roughly, if we get sort of the, I don't know, often standard recommendation for the amount of sleep we need, 7 hours a night, 49 hours a week. It's quite a bit. Personal care, so eating, bathing, dressing, prepping food. If you think about that, 3 hours a day, about 21 hours a week. So in total, all of these really primary things that we're doing constitute 110 out of 168 hours. So it leaves us 58 hours per week for everything else. And if we're using devices for 50 hours, now some of that's going to overlap with that work week stuff. Right? But we've got maybe 8 free hours in a week for what? And that's a troubling question for me, because so much of our device usage is singular. It is alone. Even if we're sitting in the same room next to another person and we're using our phones,